Niko and I are in an interesting position of repeating questions. We're doing this for the second time today. But the first place, where we're starting is going to hit a lot differently because we have so many incumbents and so many people who've been in civic life for so long here. The question had to do with folks who come along and their first effort, their first step into public life is running for public office, which is often, eyebrow raising. And so I wanted to get a take on the people here, some of whom have been around and working for a very long time for the community, about how this strikes them. Is this do they feel like this is a valid way to go? Is it, did some of them enter civic life by running for office first, rather than chairing a commission or leading a civic group or even like doing a bunch of public comment or writing essays for the paper or something? Who would like to start? Is there anyone who wants to engage on this?
Rock, paper, scissors.
I'll do it unless John wants to do it.
Absolutely.
I mean, in an ideal world, it would be much better if people were to be involved in a range of things prior to seeking public office. But I wouldn't shoot down anybody for just doing it, because what the heck, it's 50 signatures, it's what it takes. And if you're there and you've got a point you want to make, you should absolutely go for it. But I will say one thing, that when there was all this discussion about the city charter over the last few years, one of the things that I promoted in there, even though it was something I wasn't in favor of having something like a separate district councilors or whatever, but I actually thought it would be a good idea to recreate something akin to the ward committee so that people from all around the city in their respective neighborhoods could actually dive right in, get involved in things, and basically create sort of like a farm system. Mm-hmm. And so that then they could sort of get their feet wet, and then at some point they'd say, maybe I could do this citywide, and it would be I just think we'd be a healthier city if we had that. I'm not suggesting there should be a voting body or something like that, but just as a good idea generator, a way of getting people involved, or whatever. And that's one of my regrets with what came out of the whole charter process, is that we don't really have anything like that. But I think it would have been a really good addition.
Yeah, I would say, I think maybe sometimes the neighborhood committees and stuff kind of serve a little bit of that role, maybe. And I agree with Robert to the extent that I don't begrudge anybody who wants to run. It's not an easy decision. It's not an easy thing to do if you're willing to put your hat out there and hat in the ring and take the the feedback that isn't always easy. All power to you. I mean, I do think on some level though that when I meet someone who wants to run for council and they're new to the city, I always say to them, can you name the elementary schools? Okay? And now schools, maybe not city council, but most of the time they say no.
Right.
And the reason I ask that question is because schools are such a central part of community. This is local office, right? So if you're running because you want to get into politics and that's the career you want to get, great. But at the end of the day, you're going to be making decisions that are going to impact everyday people in everyday life, and you should probably know something about the community in which you're serving. Mm-hmm. And so, now, if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have been like, you have to have 3 generations, and you have to, I've evolved, But I do think it's helpful, right? It helps the conversation. There's a lot of times that people who are newer will say, oh, we should be doing this or we should be doing that, when we actually either already are doing those things or we already went down that road 5 years ago and it didn't work or whatever. So I think, I don't begrudge anybody for running, but it is, I do think you need to know a little bit more about the city than just I want to run.
Sure. Okay.
I was just going to say, I'm really grateful for my 25 years of community service, because with that I met people from all over the community, and I also was working with city staff. So I have long relationships with city staff and with MIT, one of the first funders at Magazine Beach Park. I also feel like I've been attending I-90 meetings for like 7 years, so I've met Mass DOT, I've met people in Alston that are part of that big project. at Magazine Beach, I've been working with DCR, which owns a lot of the park space and the city. I mean, I think everything actually happens through partnership and regional collaboration, and I'm really grateful for the relationships that I forged from not only my understanding of the city was informed by that work, but also I developed relationships of trust and respect that I feel make me stronger and more effective to serve. So I think being engaged civically before you run is a great idea. I think it's a really great idea.
Yeah, I agree. I think my civic duty when I was engaging with not only the neighborhood and other neighborhoods, but also the council, just seeing how that works and the process that you go through, and so it was invaluable to be able to go through the process and see what it is. And I think even more so, running for office is another step up, because you're now engaging with voters and different neighborhoods and finding out their points of view. And there is a very diverse community out there. The different neighborhoods are very different in feel, in the way they look at things. And being able to go out and touch them and get to know people is extremely valuable. So running, even if you don't win, you'll learn a lot about what's going on. So.
And if I can just jump in as the last person to speak.
I won't begrudge you.
No. I learned, I never thought politics was for me, right? And I mean that in a way of like, I always appreciated the city that I was raised in. I always gave back in terms of youth service and did a lot with our young people, but didn't really understand the decisions that got made, say at City Hall or at the school committee office, that impacted, say, our young people most importantly, but then thinking about my work on the youth centers, where that came from, right? Decisions that got made. And I was helping a candidate run for office in 2017, and I remember on election day, the former and late mayor and state rep Alice Wolf told me about the Emerge program and told me that I should learn how to run for office through Emerge. And I did. I took the classes and the training, a 6-month training in 2019 with a bunch of, I had 27 women in our cohort, from Julia Mejia in Boston to Samantha Perlman in Marlboro to so many other women across the state. And from there really got excited about what can be and what can happen if my voice was to be elevated in these spaces. And because I was at the high school working for the workforce program, I was seeing a lot of injustices firsthand. And that made me really think about how I can use my voice for good to help and support the young people that I was working with and their peers, right? And I was really grateful when I ran for school committee and won, because it gave me a lot of just a sense of hope around like how to make change and what that looks like, but also being representation of the young people who really see me as a mentor. And then when I took the time to run for council, it was because there was 3 candidates weren't running for re-election, and it was kind of like this moment of, if not now, then when? And if not me, then who? And I just took that chance, and it was a chance on everything, because I also had a small child, and it was just a lot that was going on. And so I'm really grateful, again, to be serving, but now to be as the executive director of Emerge and graduated my first class. So women who are out there, so Emerge Massachusetts, we train women on how to run for office, Democratic women, and graduated my first cohort, 23 women across the state who are like, I want to use my voice for good in my communities, from Agawam to Boston and Newton, Somerville, in Cambridge, right? There was a few women from Cambridge. And so it's a beautiful thing to be in that space when people are like, I want to do better, I want to see my community be better, and I think I have the voice to create that change. So I definitely congratulate anyone that wants to do it, and I think for Cambridge, because we are the People's Republic, it's really that sense of how much do you know about the city, and not just the one issue that you want to run on and change, but just what more, because there's so much more to the work. again, when I went from school committee to council, it was like, oh my God, like, from the parks and the potholes to, versus just focusing on education and academic excellence, et cetera. So it was really a place of like, you have to know more about our city in order to really jump in. Well, and I say have to with a sense of like, it can't just be the one thing that you're jumping into. You need to have a wealth and depth of some things. Like, I know I'm all about affordable housing. I may not be able to quote everything around zoning for you, right? But I know that I'm gonna fight for these issues and make sure that when we're channeling affordable housing, that we're channeling in a way that supports the community as a whole.
I think sometimes we forget when you're in the political bubble and you're thinking about politics and you're thinking about running is that the vast majority of people in Cambridge are not that, right? They are living their life, they're going to Little League games, they're going to soccer, they're just surviving and they're following things. And I think, sort of to your point, a couple of years ago, I was meeting with someone who was newer to the city, who was running, had graduated from the Kennedy School, and I won't say he or she, because I don't want to give any of it away, but they handed me a probably 50-page document of their political positions on all these sort of national and international things. And I said, okay, this is great. Have you been to a Little League game? Like, have you talked to the mom who, has to get her kid out to school and is, so I think when you're following politics, like you're thinking of, you think everybody's following politics, but I think most of the people in this, and that's why door knocking is so important, right? Because you meet people that they're like, oh, I didn't even know we were doing that, or I didn't even know that was, and so it's, there's a lot of people in the city who, you should get to know, right? And because you're representing them, and that takes civic engagement, it takes time.
Yeah, I'm just going to quick jump in and say here, I always make a distinction between advocacy and representation, right? They're both important, right? But the thing is that, having watched things transpire with the city council over the last 3 or 4 decades, representativeness is really the main game. I mean, if you look at 90% of what people vote on or whatever, most people are in agreement about, and your principal job is not just to sort of pick your one issue, as you sort of say, I'm here because I've got to deliver the goods on that one issue. That's my reason for being here. No. 90% of your job is just to be. You can't put 120,000 people into the Sullivan Chamber. You can only put 9 in there. So your job is to be a representative. That's the principal thing.
Yeah, I feel like our job is to channel the needs and desires of the city. And one of the, I feel honored to attend all these events all over the city. I think we've all been to about 3 or 4 events already today. But they are an incredible opportunity to see different aspects of the city. And you catch an earful of concerns about a myriad of issues. So it's really important to have that exposure. And even the events that are extraordinary, like the groundbreaking of the Biogen building this week, that was amazing because you're getting to hear from the president of MIT, you're getting to hear from the president of Biogen, you're getting to hear from our governor about our role as a life science center in the United States of America, the critical importance of our role in that place. So. So anyway, it's great for curious, engaged people, ideally with some leadership experience, and who are open and curious to be running for office.
Sure.
And it just, I know we're sort of segueing off a little bit, but it's to Robert's point about activism, but once you get elected, right, your role changes, and the job changes. And I know that there's a lot of talk and a lot of about divisiveness on the council. I mean, Robert, you remember what the council used to be like.
Well, actually, I remember one city councilor chasing another city councilor down the staircase.
Yeah. My favorite story of the school committee was used to be able to smoke, right? I mean, before my time. So, and Glenn Kuchar, who was a little bit more conservative about things, was sitting next to Sarah Mae Berman, who was more on the progressive side of things.
She was a runner.
And
They didn't want.
and so the story goes that Glenn was smoking and would always blow smoke in her direction. And then one day she whipped out one of those little fans and like blew it back. And there were those moments, right? And you don't see that stuff on the council anymore. So there may be issues, and sort of to your point of, and Robert's point of, you have 120,000 people in the city. There are going to be times when you're not going to get full agreement on things, and difficult decisions have to be made because these are difficult problems, right? Mm-hmm. And people have their points of view, and you also have to be a little egotistical to run for office, because like, why should anyone be listening? Why should people put their trust in me? Like, what the hell do I know, right? So there's a little bit of, you've got 9 people who are all kind of opinionated, who all think that, yes, I have the idea that will work. We all have our constituencies. We all want to get reelected. For the most part, we do a pretty good job of managing those disagreements and working together, and certainly compared to some history in the city. So, I think it doesn't mean that it's always perfect, and it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be tense moments. Of course, you've got 9 people in a room who are all struggling with trying to figure out how to do what they think is best. But having that temperament question of being able to, even in disagreement, find some ways to at least come together a little bit. Maybe you don't come together the whole way, but so those are important things, and it's way off from the original question of whether you should.
Well, so my follow-up is a little bit based on something you said, and it's not something we were able to ask the earlier cohort because there was just more discussion and less time. But before handing it off to Niko, I just wanted to ask, what about when, and I just want to stress, this is a question in the abstract. I don't know. I'm not talking about anyone specific. What about a voting record? What about when you encounter someone who hasn't voted? And I'm going to draw a distinction between not voting nationally and not voting in a municipal election, where you can't really use the argument, oh, the parties are alike. What happens when you encounter a candidate who has no voting record or has voted spottily?
In municipal?
In municipal.
And they're running for municipal.
Yes.
Yeah, usually.
I mean, it's for the people. It's for the people to vote and for the people to decide. I mean, I don't really know. I feel like maybe a couple terms ago there was some spotlights on the candidates and kind of what their voting records were. I don't know if that'll pop up again this year, but that again needs to be for the people to decide, because I'll tell you who has my #1 vote. It's me, right?
So,
Wait a minute.
Mark, I'm sorry. I never promised.
But you promised
I
me.
was so close.
the shocking exclusive here.
So I think in terms of what that looks like for every individual, it's about who else is going to vote for you out there, and it's important for the people across the city to know. But I don't know if many people across the city actually care, right? And I think depending on who you're talking to, there's going to be many people in our city who really care about your voting record, and there's going to be quite a few people who also are just like, I don't even know how to look that up. I wouldn't even know where to go, right? So I think there's just that, and it's about who do you relate to, who really sees, not only just what's on your palm, your lit, but who actually is making that connection with you, especially when you're on the doors and in the community.
So if someone isn't voting, it usually takes something to activate them, right? They have to have a
One issue.
They have an issue, and usually that gets them off the couch, because in a lot of cases, most people couldn't name 3 city councilors, right? And that's just the truth of it, because they have their lives, they have their careers, they have their children. And it takes one issue that really gets them off the couch, whether it's a big building on their block that they don't like, or it's traffic jams or whatever it might be. But it takes something to get them off the couch and make that happen. There's a lot of mundane things. When I was at the door one time, and I said, well, your neighbors, he said, what's hot? And he says, well, here's what your neighbors are worried about. And he goes, well, I agree with all those, but what about rats? And so, at the end of the day, the city is really about safety. It's about, traffic. It's about the things that have touched people's lives. And luckily here it's somewhat mundane. Much of it works. There are exceptions, but in order to get people moving, and they're pretty comfortable right now because it is safe, you know, the trash gets picked up and those types of things. But something has to get somebody off the couch, and they have to be passionate about it.
Actually, I just want to jump in and say, just got to toot my own horn here. Since I do keep a track of all the voting histories or whatever, and I put up information about voting histories, which is probably how most people find out about the voting histories. There are about 70 people who haven't missed an election since 1997, and I call them the super voters. And I'd like to say to everybody, I am a super voter. I've never missed, you know. And the funny thing about it is when you actually look at the list of them all, I go, I know this person, you know. But that's how it is, you know. But I will say, when I put up on my website information about all the voting histories, I just do it because I know people might be curious. It's not meant as any sort of judgment, whatever. But I do get email messages from people, sometimes which are really mean-spirited. People are sort of trying to grab whatever they can to disparage somebody. And then I have to sort of say, give me a break, right? You know, so the thing is it's, if you're a voter, there's lots of criteria out there. If you want to use voting history as one thing, that's up to you. You know, if you want to use your position on this issue or that issue, that's up to you. You know, a lot of people would vote just based on how long was this person born and raised here. I was not. I am an adopted Cantabrigian. Thank you very much. But you know, if they want to base their, you know, it's up to the voter. You know, they can use whatever criteria they wish.
And I just wanted to say, and thank you, Robert Winters, for keeping your Cambridge Civic Journal going, which has not only tracked who's been voting, but also receipts, who's raising money and what sort of money they're raising and where it's coming from. So I think outside of Cambridge Day, I feel like the Cambridge Civic Journal has been the best source of news, and now the Harvard Crimson is also adding to the pool of information. But I feel like those have been the three central sources for local news. So we're all grateful to you, and again, we're grateful to Marc for getting Cambridge Day going since 2009, a service to the community.
It's been a nice hobby. Just want to point out, it's not my job. It's just a hobby.
I would say, first of all, you also have to. It's very easy to look at a chart and try to sum up somebody's who they are and what they stand for. There's always a story behind something, right? So I'd like to know, why didn't somebody vote, right? I mean, maybe they moved out of state, you know, maybe they were in college, maybe, you know, maybe if you go back far enough before early voting and mail-in voting, maybe they were in the hospital that day. I mean, there's all kinds of things, right? So you gotta be careful about, I think sometimes people think, they look at one or two things and they think they know the person, or they think they know, we're all more complicated than that, right? And so I wouldn't judge somebody based on, you know, just that voting record. I would also say in municipal elections, there's, you know, so when rent control sort of went away, and that was sort of the big divisive, you know, issue, right? And then when that was gone in '94, there was sort of this, I mean, when you're interested in what you think, Robert, there was sort of this lull of divisive issues, right? And then, you know, now, you know, development and bike lanes are sort of leading that conversation, which are drawing people out because they feel strongly one way or the other. But for the most part, you know, most of the people running for local office in Cambridge are not, we're all kind of in the same ballpark, right? You don't have super right-wing Trump agenda type people running, right? We're all kind of, you know, you read our palm cards, it sounds like we all agree on everything, right? And there's sort of the devil's in the details a little bit. But it's a well-run city. We have a strong city manager. We're all kind of in the same ballpark on some things. Nobody's running saying we should be arresting unhoused people, right? We might have different feelings about how to, you know, help people and deal with it. But so I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I mean, it's, what does it matter, right? And so I think that keeps some people home. But again, I think, you know, when you have a strong issue that you feel strongly about, then that does drag people. And I think that's probably what we're seeing a little bit. I bet numbers start to climb a little bit as some of these, you know, there's 2 or 3 issues that people feel strongly about one way or the other that drives people out. But if that's not there, I think most people are pretty satisfied with the city, and they kind of, maybe they don't feel the need to vote locally.
Yeah, since you, I mean, I'll give you my impression of it. It's true, but once upon a time we had the principal camps, and Mark knows as well as anyone else, it was the Cambridge Civic Association, which was largely aligned with the rent control issue, or not originally, by the way, but it became known to be that. And then the others, which are the independents, right? And yeah, after all of that kind of disintegrated after question 9, we did go through a period where it was sort of every man, every woman for himself. It was and it wasn't issue driven, but it was in very small ways. Maybe it was about 10 years ago, I'd say, that organizations started coming into existence, and that's great, because I think it does help in terms of the electability of certain people. You have candidates slated. It's helpful, I think, and also voters need information, and it may be imperfect information, but they appreciate getting some advice, and sometimes you just don't have that advice. But that said, the single issue aspect of the organizations, to me, has become really problematic, and I think it's unfair to potential candidates too, that they have to say, well, I may not agree with you 100% on this here, but you got to sign the pledge, or you got to be part of this, or you're not going to get support unless you agree with us 100%. I just think most of us are different than that. We don't fit so easily into these little boxes. And I just kind of wish that these various endorsing organizations and all these things would sort of open up a little bit, or else come up with some new ones that are just a little bit more broad in scope and not so narrowly focused and saying, my way or the highway. I think we'd all be better for that.
So
I
think,
agree.
Yeah.
People agree to come back to the organizational issue. And Niko?
But my question is regarding kind of qualifications and experience. I think a lot of people have an idea of what someone running for office should look like and what background they should have. I think, just again, talking generally, there's some who think or would argue that you need an Ivy League degree to run for office. I think some would argue that you need working class experience. Some would argue that you need to be a homeowner. Some would argue that you need to be a renter. I personally believe that there's a million entry points into politics and civic life, but I'm curious to hear from your personal perspective, why is your experience needed on the council, and more generally, what experience is missing from the council currently?
I can chime in. So I think leadership experience is really, really important. I was the head of the Cambridgeport Neighborhood Association for almost 4 years. I think that was really helpful, and a lot of city staff and community organizations presented to us during those years. So I feel like that was part of my education. I think it's, I think proven leadership and proven ability to get things done is very, very helpful. I wish there were more people on the council so my training was as a museum curator, but I really am an experienced project director. But I did study art history and architectural history and design. And I wish more of my colleagues on the council had that training or urban planning training, because I think it would inform the decisions that they're making about upzoning. So I think it's been interesting because we have our social workers. We have, Paul is a lawyer. We have sort of representatives of different sort of professional experiences that inform their outlook on the council. But I feel like it would be helpful, it would be helpful to have a businessman. It would be helpful to have someone so deeply knowledgeable about civic affairs on the council. I think it's good to have representatives from abroad, coming from a variety of perspectives, so they're not doing groupthink. So they're actually challenging one another and thinking creatively to come up with solutions for the city. So I don't think there's one way to train to be on the council, but I just feel like being open-minded, creative, curious, being willing to do the homework, having a proven track record of having done that homework. And I guess for me, I did that, again, leading the Cambridgeport Neighborhood Association, but I also was the co-chair of the conservation committee of the local garden club, which is a really great group. And I've organized just 1 million lectures over the course of time. I feel like all of that has been useful, those project management skills, those organizational skills, to being on the council.
Yeah, so I think, I think a broad base on the council is important. I think what I bring is a businessman's point of view of starting companies and bringing them to market. And there's a lot of things that we do in the city that is bringing things to market. It's going out and talking to the stakeholders, figuring out what the benefits you want to get, figuring out how to measure those benefits, and then measuring the results to get the benefits. And so that's what I can bring to that is the experience with, dissecting something. In a business, startup business, you spend 2 years and $6 million coming up with the answer. You're going to deliver something. You talk to customers, experts, and everything else, and then you launch it, and you give it to the first customer, and they say that sucks. It doesn't do it. And then you take their criticism, and you go back and you whittle it, and it still sucks, but not as bad. But eventually, you get to something that really works, and it's successful. And I think, from a government standpoint, we should be able to measure, decide on the benefits that we're trying to get, measure against those, and then try to incrementally improve them, because nobody can ever get it right first. And so that's what I can bring. But I think you need a broad base, and I think people also vote on how they relate to the person. Right? Are they responsive? Are they enthusiastic? Are they, do they understand what they're doing? Do they represent me? And so I think there's, you have your expertise in schooling or in jobs and other things, but you also have that element of personal skills and enthusiasm that you can push through. So,
I'll just dive in here. We use proportional representation in our elections, and I think, to your point, I think that in an ideal world, we should have the elected body of, whether it's 6 members on the school committee or 9 persons on the city council, should be reasonably representative of the whole city. There are a lot of people with advanced degrees in the city, so maybe you should have some people with that. There are a lot of people who are involved in human services throughout the city. A lot of people involved in the education sector. It would be ideal to do that, but I also think that it's almost like sometimes in competition, because we would also like to have representation based on personal identities or on what neighborhoods you're from, and we don't always succeed in that. So I often raise this question over the last year or so. I always say, everybody says, we love our proportional representation election system. I say, proportional to what? It's a simple question, but proportional to what? And I don't know how it is, but through some sort of weird alchemy, somehow we managed to get it somewhat representative, but it's often imperfect. Mm-hmm. I think when Joan Pickett passed away, unfortunately, she was very, very hot on the trail of a lot of financial type of stuff. Municipal finance was, and I thought it was a tremendous loss to lose that expertise. And I sort of hope that we can recover more and more of that. But again, it's sort of like, I just raised that question, proportional to what, really? Mm-hmm. So
I'm going to say that I'm a professional advocate, and so I think my whole life and training has been around advocacy and making sure that especially our most vulnerable youth and families are being served and serviced in a way that they also feel like they belong in our communities. And so I think having that skill set and that background, having the degree of social work kind of came much later after already being an advocate and doing youth work. I think just having that ability to see an issue, see a need within pockets of our community and say, how can we actually do better within our community to meet those needs? That ability to advocate, to know, and to know that if we are meeting our supporting and reaching our most vulnerable, then everybody's going to be successful and succeed. So as we look at homelessness, there are unhoused community, as we look at people who are dealing with mental health issues and concerns there, those who are living in poverty in our city that's so wealthy. It's like, how, right? And so when you think about, even just cash assistance to families, like that being kind of like the low-hanging fruit of what maybe things that we could be doing to support individuals, recognizing, that there's a cost to that, but we have individuals in our family, in our cities that can't put food on the table, right? Who are really struggling to make small ends meet that other families are able to do without blinking an eye. And that's heartbreaking because that's also my life story, right? And so I think a little bit of my own identity in that work also pushes the drive of like, I get it and I know that. I also sit here as the third Black woman and fourth woman of color to serve in the history of the city council, which I think is not progressive at all and really quite sad. And so when we talk about even that level of representation and, you know, in leadership and what I hold in my identities just across kind of who I am, it's, you know, as a Black woman, as a mom to a toddler, there's a lot of things, a social worker, you know, a youth worker, all those things really just hits different buckets that I think people align with and see as valuable on the council. So yes, I may not have a planning degree or a planner's degree, but I have advocacy skills and I have basically a PhD in advocacy. And I think I get things done in that respect, or I open people's minds and eyes up to, oh wow, I didn't think about it from that perspective. Oh wow, you're bringing something else here to the table that I wasn't mindful of, and let's think about things a little differently, which I kind of appreciate being that added voice to the council this term.
Yeah, I think, you know, nobody's gonna be an expert in everything, right? And especially if you run in, and I think, Ayesha, you had mentioned this earlier, you know, because we both served on the school committee, you know, you're dealing, you know, I worked in schools, I was working special ed, I knew a lot about schools, I was a parent of kids in the schools, so I felt pretty, like, that was the one thing they were dealing with, and I was like, okay, I'm pretty much, I got this, right? City council, you're dealing with a million different things, and so no one's gonna be an expert on all of it, and that's why it's important, you bring different things to the table, right? And people bring different skills to the table, or different education, knowledge, work experience. But I think, you know, some things to some of the characteristics that I think makes it to make you more successful, and in turn more successful for the community, is, and something I think, you know, I bring to the table, is being able to, first of all, not hold grudges against colleagues, right, and other people, and being willing to work with anybody where you can find common ground. And so, you know, we don't battle about too much, we're on the same page on most of the things, but, you know, Ayesha and I might vote differently on a particular issue and might, you know, go back and forth a little bit on a particular issue, but then the very next thing on the agenda we're holding hands on, right? Or, you know, if Cathie and I disagree on something, but we still find areas where we can work together.
We all work to bring attention to the CSO outflows at Elwife, right? We did that together.
We did do that.
So, you know, it's, you know, having that sort of temperament, right? And how do you, I remember a school committee meeting where it was a retreat, and Fred Fantini and I almost went over the tables at each other about standardized testing, right? And we were going at it. And when the retreat was over, he was like, "You want to get a drink?" And I was like, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
And you know, and so, you know, you have to have a temperament to be able to work with people, you know. And I think, you know, I'm always proud of the fact that, yeah, look, I certainly have my issues and I have my moments. We all do. But I'm always proud of the fact that I have worked on significant pieces of legislation with all my other colleagues, whether some that aren't here anymore, some that are here, you know, always able to say, okay, look, maybe we're not on the same page on our housing policy or on our bike lane policy, but we are on the same page on this other issue. How do we move this forward? How do we work together? And that is almost more important, I think, to having a functional body, which is going to then do better work for the community as a whole than whether I went to Harvard or UMass Boston, where I graduated from. So, to me, that's what's, you know, those are key, and I think that's some of what I think is something that I bring to the table. And I think a lot of us bring to it, not just me, but I think you know, being able to work with others and figuring out how to navigate, you know, difficult conversations, right? I mean, I don't know, we're not going to get too into policy, but if you take the multifamily housing policy, right, that looked what came out looked really different than where we were originally. And there could have been 5 votes to just kind of ram that through and pass it. But what came out was through negotiation and through conversation, and it managed to make people angry on both sides of the issue, which isn't necessarily great. But there was compromise there, right? People were willing to say, okay, I want to hear what your point of view is, and I'm willing to, not get everything that I want, but get a lot of what I want. And I think that's more often where we land on things. I mean, most of the votes on the council are 8-1, 9-0, 7-2. There are some 5-4s. There are some 5-4s, and there's always going to be 5-4s.
Yeah.
There's always been 5-4s. It doesn't matter what 9 people are in that room. There's always going to be an issue where you just can't land in a place where the majority of the people agree, or I guess 5-4 is a majority, but the vast majority. But I think for the most part, having people that are willing to work with each other and talk to each other and kind of let things go when they do have those more intense moments, that's what makes a functional committee. And I think for the most part, we all do that.
Yeah.
In our first cohort, very diverse, but it definitely skewed younger, and it skewed to first-time candidates, or newer candidates, I should say. All of you have decades of experience in civic life. And so I am curious to know, from your perspective, a lot of people would argue they need fresh blood or fresh perspectives. But you guys have been at it for a long time, and maybe that experience is valuable too. And so I'd like to give you an opportunity to not necessarily defend your record on policy, but to defend your experience in civic life.
Well, I was knocking on her door the other day, and a couple answers to this. So I knocked on this person's door the other day, and she knew who I was and didn't hold back from telling me that this entire city council are buffoons, and people working for the city don't know what they're doing, and I said, well, is there anything you like about the city? Just what's good about the city? And she said, I love our environmental policy, I love that we invest in our schools, I love that we invest in public safety, and she listed like all these things, and I said, well, you think that happens by accident? Right? It happens because we have good people working for the city. We have a city council that promotes the values that people bring forward to the city. It's not all going to be perfect, never going to be perfect. But, this idea that somehow, people, I think Cambridge is a great place to live. That's sort of provocative to say in an election, because the easiest thing to do is to criticize everything. I think Cambridge is a great place to live. Are we perfect? Not perfect. Housing is still too expensive. We still have a 2-tiered education system. Lots of things we can point to that we have to get better at. But it is a great city, and that doesn't happen because you have a whole bunch of buffoons working for the city or representing the city. So I think experience matters. Being a good elected official, it's a skill set. You wouldn't say, oh, I need, my mouth is hurting, I'm going to go to the dentist who's never been a dentist before, right? There's a skill set. How do you work with people? How do you build coalitions? How do you compromise? How do you build trust with people? How do you understand all these different complicated issues? There is a skill set. I'm not good at a whole lot of things, trust me. But I'm pretty good at this, I think. And some other people, are good at other things, and maybe they're not so great at being an elected official. So this idea that experience, there aren't a lot of professions where people would say experience is irrelevant. I think experience matters. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that you don't need fresh voices, because you need new voices, you need new experience, you need people to push you to think differently. But there's got to be a balance, right? 9 city councilors who have never served before probably wouldn't be a great city council. 9 city councilors who have been there for 40 years probably wouldn't be a great city council. So, I think sometimes people are politics is a profession where people are very easily to say, oh, experience. I mean, God, look at the buffoon in the White House right now, right? Let's elect someone who's, never been a politician before, because they're going to clean it all up, so... I just think there needs to be a balance.
And I think just to add on, what we have right now on the council is quite diverse in terms of length of time on the council, right? I'm serving my first term on the council, although I 2 terms on the school committee, right? So I'm a very new elected official, if you would, right? But again, that level of advocacy that I've done for over 20 years has kind of prepared me for an opportunity to represent the city at large, right? And be like, I can do this in a greater capacity that can at least touch more people and support more people. So, and I think other of my colleagues, you know, whether you look at someone and they did a term and didn't, you know, and then came back for a second term, we have like the 1s and 2s of terms people, right? In addition to having fresh, you know, older folks in the game who have more experience and folks who I can call on, like, I have this idea or this thought. I don't know Robert's rules all, you know, from front and back, but I'm getting to learn that, and I learn more and more through the meetings that we have, and just by going maybe on Robert's Winters page.
I don't think that experience in government is what people say are talking about when you say I want something fresh. It's fresh ideas. It's fresh, somebody that represents my experience in life, and it's not the freshness isn't necessarily have to do with the experience you have in government or with the community or whatever it might be. That's not what forms your soul and your point of views. And I think when people want a fresh point of view from the government, are we working on the right things? Do we have the right priorities? You know, is this what it represents my values? Those are the things they're looking for as a fresh view. And I don't think that has to do with experience. Maybe you get into a rut if you have too much experience, but it's not the experience that causes that. It's because you're in a rut and you're getting bored with what you're doing or whatever it might be. So I think when people are talking about new, it's let's change the direction. Let's get another point of view, and let's make a change. So
I'll just dive in a little bit here. I'm reminded of a term Glenn Cucci used to use in describing candidates. Sometimes people will vote for somebody because they are, quote, don't take it literally, the pretty new face. You know, so the person who's attracting I was of course thinking of Mark when I said that. And so there's a tendency, especially when people feel incumbents are safe, that they want to vote for the pretty new face. So I'm sure anybody who's an incumbent now, like going, whoa, watch out for them.
Stick with the pretty face. Pretty face.
Exactly, that's true. But there's also, I guess, there's another kind of metaphor you could use, which is the shiny new object. So somebody comes in and says, I've got this brilliant idea about housing should be, or I've got this brilliant idea about transportation ought to be, whatever. And they might be right, and they might be wrong. But I think a lot of times, sort of in the spirit of progressivism, people sort of say, we all got to get on board this. It's the new thing, man. It's the shiny new thing. You know, and I think sometimes the shiny new thing is going to get tarnished pretty quickly. You know, and I'd even throw that in, not just amongst the elected officials, but even within some of the city departments. I think some of the city departments are sort of losing a lot of important institutional memory, and there's a lot of tendency toward you know, making a big splash on something that they can sort of put the big press release out on or whatever. And you know, sometimes you sort of have to be a little bit more of a transition oriented from the past to the further present into the future. And I think sometimes when you become so addicted to the pretty new face or the shiny new object, sometimes you lose that. So.
And I just wanted to add, I think it's really, again, important to have a diversity of points of view and thoughtful conversation, because we're discussing like big ideas. I know we're not supposed to be talking about policy, but we're discussing policies that are going to define the future of the city at the council. So it's really important that there is a high level of discourse at the council meetings. And I am hoping that there will be some new energy brought to the council with this election, because I think there's a lot of groupthink on the council. And I think there are a lot of people wed to certain ideologies and not thinking beyond the ideology. So I think it's always great to have I don't care if someone disagrees with me as long as they can explain what their point of view is and what the foundation for their understanding of an issue is. Because again, there's too much at stake on the council not to be considering things in really thoughtful ways, whether it's, in zoning. Do we want to follow the recommendations of Envision Cambridge, or do we want to disregard those recommendations completely? Do we want to consider the city's policy of gentle growth in gentle density, which it has been following for decades? Or do we want to allow developers to randomly define the heights and the shape of our city? They're like serious issues that we're discussing, and what I appreciate as a former museum curator is just people looking at issues from all the different angles, thinking about the unintended consequences, what the repercussions are going to be, before seizing on an idea and moving it forward.
So now we're gonna get a little spicy. Because I actually think we all do that. And I think for you to say that there are certain counselors that just get ideologue and they don't think about the whole picture, or they're not thoughtful, that's pretty insulting to your colleagues. I think we all do that. We may land in different places. People think if you're someone who, let's say, is less supportive of housing development, you think the people who are supportive of they're just ideologues. They just, but you're okay. You're pure in the way you think about it.
Mark, I'm not less for housing development.
I didn't say that. I'll use that as an example.
Yeah.
So take something else.
There was a
You
suggestion.
believe in dog parks, right? So I don't like dog parks. But because you believe in dog, you're just an ideologue that wants the animal rights people to vote for you. But I don't believe in it, and I'm pure in my decision on how, we all
I think
have
we
opinions.
need cat parks. That's what we
We
really
need
need.
cats. But I get it. I mean, I got to push back on that to say that I don't think anybody on our council, whether I agree with their position or not, is not thoughtful about what we're doing. We all take this job incredibly seriously. We all think about these things 24/7. And just because someone may have a different opinion than you doesn't mean that they're an ideologue and you're not. So I think I just got to push back on that. I think that's really, I don't know.
I want to totally agree on that, and I also just want to say, the perspectives of 9 different people to come into a room, into the chamber, and actually debate and discuss issues that are important to everyone across our city in very different ways is not the easiest thing to do, right? Especially when we're talking about hot ticket conversations, whether it's been housing and bike lanes. So on those issues where we know that it's already hot, we have to come in doing our homework, making sure that we are in a place of representing the voice in which we bring to the table, and thinking about those unintended consequences as well, but also making sure that we're making decisions that we know 10, 20 years from now can still improve the lives of so many more across our city. So I think personally, again, we're not going to be perfect in these decisions. There's many things that we all 9 of us vote on, right? And it's unanimous, not just resolutions, but policies.
Congratulations.
But when we do have those 5-4s, those are really intense conversations where there's a lot of learning and growing and sticking kind of to your guns on this level of advocacy. I have to stay consistent right now on this issue, because if I don't, there are people out there that I know this is going to impact in a very different way. And so I just say that in a way of like, we're all working hard at doing this job. It's, but I think any new person or us sitting incumbents right now, we know that any decision that we want to put forward, we know that we need to have at least 5. We need to have at least 5 to get it over the finish line. So new people, bright ideas, all that good stuff. Incumbents, bright ideas, all that good stuff. We all just want to push. We want to make sure that our city is the great place that whether you grew up here or you are new here, that you could continue to live here, possibly raise your families here, work, thrive, and enjoy, right? And learn, continue to learn in. We want to make sure that our schools are safe. We want to make sure that our communities are safe, that people are learning and growing and being able to do it together, because that's about diversity and that's about equity and inclusion. And I think that there's a lot of things that we miss in how we have these conversations, but it doesn't mean that you're right and I'm wrong. It means that we just have some learning and growing to do together. And that's why I love, that's the one thing that I really love about being at this seat, is I get to see kind of who am I totally aligned with and who am I like, maybe I need to sit down with them some more. So Cathie, let's get coffee.
So if we cut down the middle of ideologues and collegiality and skill set and experience, and we find that the city manager is at the heart of things. We have a form of government where the city manager is running a staff, and you guys are setting policies for the city manager to follow. And I'm just curious as to what the sense is about, when it comes to skill sets, is it more important or less important to have those skill sets to match city staff? Or is it okay to be more of an ideologue, more of an ideas person, and give rough ideas and let them go at it? If we didn't have finance experts, if we didn't have lawyers
On the council.
on the council,
I could jump in with something. This is sort of a historical perspective. You might ask a question, when they first proposed the Planning Charter form of government back in the 1930s, why wasn't there proportional representation associated with all these other systems? Or why, I should say better, why was it that it was tied to a strong city manager form of government? And I believe, from what I've read historically and the way it works around the world, is that proportionality is really good to get a lot of crazy people in the same room together, yelling at each other and hacking it out, and maybe disagreeing, and maybe getting it to fisticuffs or whatever. But if you don't have some sort of strong executive tied to it, right, then it's just chaos. So in many respects, it is important to have a strong city manager if you want to have this kind of, free-for-all, or potentially free-for-all amongst elected officials. And I think in some respects, you could speak to this more so than I could, but they changed on their edge reform on the school committee side, so that once upon a time, the school committee had a lot more say-so, and Mark as well, in terms of hiring and firing and whatever, and I don't think that was so great. But the thing is that you had this sort of diverse school committee, but then you could still have a stronger form of school superintendent, so that ultimately, their job is still dependent on you, just like our city managers depending on the city councilors. But the thing is that it was very important that the manager have some sort of a strong hand to run the show, ultimately.
I think that, being not serving yet, my impression is that the council is about policy, and you're setting a direction, right? And implementation is what the city manager does. He has the teams to do it. He has the expertise, and it's sort of you say, okay, I want to connect these 5 spots in the city with bike lanes. You step back and you let the experts figure out the best paths, right? And that might be that would be the way to do it. But it's setting the goals rather than the implementation. And so the manager has the people on his staff that are legal, they're traffic experts, they're whatever the issue is, and he can call on them to come back to the council. Now there has to be trust that the council is going to ask for reasonable things, and that the answers are going to come back are going to be answer those questions and answer those issues in a faithful way. But I think there is a pretty good line there, that policy versus implementation and direction. And you can tell me if that's how it worked.
And I supported, there was conversation in the charter about moving away from a city manager. I supported the city manager form of government. That doesn't mean I'm always happy with it, right? I mean, it doesn't, if we had a strong mayor, we wouldn't always be happy. So I understand people who are saying, well, if we didn't like what the mayor was doing, we could vote for somebody else to be mayor. So there is that sort of issue about, we're not gonna, it's very hard to fire a city manager. It's not something we do terribly often. When was the last time that happened?
Never?
Never.
No, actually, not never.
So it's not something we do.
It happened once.
It happened once, okay.
Thanks for that history. I have to look that one up.
So I get that piece of it, but at the same time, I mean, again, are we perfect? No, but we are a very successful city. We're financially stable. We spend a lot of money on our schools. We're one of the safest, I think I saw that for cities over, there's like 14 or 16 or something cities over 70,000 in Massachusetts, and we were ranked behind Newton as the safest city of over 70 or 75,000. And Newton's a lot different than Cambridge, right? I mean,
not bad for a very urban setting.
Yeah,
to
right,
be able to make
right.
that claim.
We're a so we can always find things. Yeah. I mean, maybe we have differences on certain issues, and there's certainly a lot we have to do. We can always be better and should be better in a lot of things, but this system has pretty much worked, right? And I can pick out, we passed 20 resolutions on municipal broadband, 9-0, and it didn't happen. And I could say someone could point to that and say, well, that's a failure of this whole system. But there's 20 other things that our system has done really, really well. So I think it works. It's frustrating sometimes, but it works. I mean, the results are pretty clear.
And we all voted for the city manager form of government in the new charter, and I think, thank God for it, because I think it would just be too political if we didn't have a strong city manager. And ultimately, the city manager is responsible for our financial welfare. Ultimately, it's up to him whether whether we can balance our books, whether we have the money to fund the programs that the council prioritizes. So I feel like it's the city manager that has to, in his staff, and he's got an extraordinary staff. I'm just talking about city staff overall is extraordinary. They have to make things work. He's evaluated in part by whether he and the city respond to see-click fix complaints, and the city does that in a certain number of days, like 90% of the complaints. I mean, and so I think it's really important that ultimately someone is in charge of our budget, because we've got a $1.1 billion budget, and as you may know, I'm a little worried about that budget because vacancies are up, commercial vacancies are up, and our commercial tax levy will be down, so we're going to have less money going forward. And but ultimately, it'll be up to the city manager and the staff to really figure out what needs to be whittled down, to evaluate programs, and to reconsider where we should be spending our money, so that but following council priorities. So I think it's a nice interface. Again, we set priorities, and the city staff delivers and make sure that we stay solvent.
There is one point I would like to make, though, and this was related to the charter discussion as well. Under the existing charter, Ayesha cannot technically pick up the phone and call up somebody in Human Services, do this. That's a felony, actually, right? Mark can't call up Public Works and say, I want you to, you better pave my street now or else, or I'll fire this person. Can't do that. And nor should anybody ever want to be doing that. But there are times, I feel, that some of the departments are sort of hiding behind that iron wall, knowing full well that the political people can't really call them in on the carpet so well. And maybe they try and do it a little during the budget hearings. Madam so-and-so, why aren't we doing this, that, or the other thing? I think it would be a good change if we actually had a regular way in which we could, in a public way, not private phone call badgering somebody, bring some of the departments, on the carpet and say, look, we're not so happy about what's going on here in community development or in traffic and parking or Public Works or whatever, though everybody loves Public Works. So I take that one back, right? You know, and I don't think we have a very good mechanism for doing that. And I think, I think anybody who's been through the budget hearings know that there's just a little bit of that sort of, you know, and then whoever's chairing the meeting has to say, excuse me, is that a financial question? We can only ask for, you know, we're not supposed to talk about is that, you know, I do think it would be a good change if we could find some mechanism for doing that, maybe in a roundtable setting, so there's a, like.
Especially the department, you know, CDD's always in front of us, right? Traffic and parking's always in front of us. You can kind of, you get your opportunities to, you know, either.
Police is always in front of us.
To call them out on something if you feel you need to. But there are, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think most of the time, for most of the city departments, you know, the only time we really see them or get to hear from them is during the budget, and then that gets a little clunky, and so, yeah, I think having some, you know, maybe it is roundtables, and you know, and roundtables don't always, you know, one thing I've been sort of saying for years is that when we do roundtables, we always do them in place of a city council meeting. They don't have to be. I mean, you can't really do them on a Tuesday or every other Tuesday because the mayor is at city council, but there are other days of the week, you know, and there are other times that you can do them. But I mean, that's you know, that's probably something we should be doing, even just to inform the public. And maybe it's not even, maybe it's all great. Maybe it's not to call them out on the carpet, right? But there are a lot of departments that we don't even necessarily know everything that they're working on and they're doing, because that all goes to the city manager and doesn't necessarily come to us. So if we're not necessarily informed, the public is not. So to give those departments an opportunity to talk about what they're working on, how it's going, we could push back if necessary. The public, you know, maybe not a round table because there's no public comment on a round table. Maybe we'll call it something else. Maybe it's something else.
Special meeting.
You know, you know. But then, yeah, I think that's
There needs to be a little bit of public input as well into these things,
right.
and not just the 2 minutes. I mean, if there's something really substantial that needs to be said, this is sort of a gripe I have generally about our 2-minute rule here. Sometimes you do need to say a little bit more, and I don't know that we necessarily get enough chance for the public to really do that.
I think
We will
that's
be there all night.
I
into
know,
the next day.
I know.
But maybe it would be a different format. But I do think also the departments need to have some independence, because ultimately
They
CDD
do.
planning staff should be using their professional expertise to push back often, or to, you know, so the council may be pushing for something, but their responsibility isn't just to do whatever we recommend, it's to push back and say, well, actually that doesn't really work, or actually you could do this much better by doing this. So we want them pushing back, and we want transportation pushing back too. We want to make sure that they're listening and hearing public and council feedback, but we also want them to, you know, they are the experts. They are subject experts in transportation and city planning, and we rely on their professional experience to inform what they're recommending for the city. So there's got to be a little bit of independence.
I would love it if people within individual departments would just push back routinely, and not be living in fear that somehow 5 city councilors are going to be mad at them or whatever. You know, if they have that expertise, they absolutely should fearlessly speak
It's their job.
forward.
They're not serving us if they're not pushing
and
back.
that's why we have the system we have.
That's right.
Right,
That's
because
right.
they should be allowed to do that and not worry about whether or not 5 councilors would
Exactly.
disagree with them.
Exactly.
But somehow they don't feel like they do. So I think that's something that we do need to dive deeper on and ask the questions of like, why? What is the, you know, is it the creation of the culture within our, you know, from the council or from the city manager? Like, what is it that doesn't make that comfortability, make people feel comfortable enough? Because I mean, if I get a phone call from someone, which I have, they'll say, please keep that between you and I, you know, and I'm just like, oh, well, I need you to, like, I want to have your back and, you know, in this. And, you know, it could be anything. I know, like, say, for example, we were talking about bike lanes and, you know, just public safety, being able to get up and down the streets, and how some folks would say, well, maybe whether you're a firefighter or a police officer, you might say it has been challenging to get up and down, say, Cambridge Street, for example. It is challenging. But yet, could we get that on the floor and in public, you know?
Probably not.
No, never have we ever. We've asked the question directly and you get, no, we're okay. And it's like, no, you're not. Or, you know, so,
Yeah.
I mean, so that's just an example. And I think it's just one of those things where people feel like they don't have the comfortability to be that transparent in terms of how they can be doing their job more efficiently, based on decisions that do come from the council floor to inform their work.
So much of this is how you balance things, right? I don't want to go back to Bob Healy days where, and I never served with Bob as city manager, I was on the school committee at the time, but, you know, councilors weren't even allowed to look at people who work for the city. If you nodded your head, well, you know, I mean, I'm exaggerating. I'm exaggerating, but not much. I'm not exaggerating
Wow.
much. It was, I mean, it was Bob's show, and there was, you know, and that I'm not sure is the best thing. But you also can't have 9 city councilors calling, you know, people who work for every department and saying, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. I mean, that's not a good way to run an organization either. So, you know, again, it's sort of, sometimes we do it really well, sometimes maybe we stumble, but it's sort of finding that balance where you want to be able to talk to people and ask questions and not always have to go through the city manager to ask a simple question. You know, if they're, you know, should I, you know, if I'm walking down my sidewalk, walking home, and I see a dead rat on the sidewalk, do I need to call the city manager before I call the Department of Public Works and say, hey, I got a dead rat? I mean, that would be kind of, would waste the city manager's time, right? So, you know, there's got to be some balance to it, but it's good that there is some open communication.
I think Ayesha actually used exactly the right word, though. Because sometimes, you know, certainly, you know, since, by the way, is the charter matter, did they get the final?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
It's on the
Just want to
ballot.
be clear, because I didn't heard the news about that just yet. But a lot of times people think that, you know, the structure, the charter somehow it answers all the questions. If you use the word culture, you know, the thing is there is something just as substantial to having a healthy civic political culture, where in fact we all know the rules, but you know, maybe we can sort of have a conversation that maybe, you know, crosses a line a little bit, but it's sort of still part of the culture, and as long as we're all respectful about it, you know, like I wouldn't have any objections, for example, to city councilors striking up a conversation with the department head, but as long as they're not badgering them, whatever, and not indirectly saying, well, if you don't do this, you know. But I think sometimes I actually think even the open meeting law is destructive, because it doesn't allow for enough flexibility and freedom for people just to have reasonable conversations. Somebody maybe ought to just ring up the Secretary of State's office and say,
Good idea.
could you please revise that just a little bit so that we're not living in fear that we somehow inadvertently talk to 5 people, you know? A little bit more flexibility would be a good thing.
But just for the sake of time, we do have 2 final questions, looking at not only the kind of political pacts that we see in Cambridge, but also the kind of increased polarization. So pass it back to my colleague, Mark.
I think that gets to it. I'm sort of struck by the fact that these groups, these organizations over time, as of this year, I feel, have begun to be known as PACs and super PACs. It's language that I hadn't even heard used or, you know, wielded until like very recently.
That's right.
And so there's, whereas the conversation used to be like, you know, do you take developer money? There's still a little bit of that around. I feel like increasingly people are asking like about endorsements and taking money from the PACs. And I just sort of want to like have some conversation getting at that. Like, are these groups feeling politically useful, politically oppressive? Are they like what is the vibe on ABC and CCC and
Who's taking this
CBS?
first?
I'll take the.
All right, Jonathan.
I'm the
A
newbie.
newbie.
I'm the newbie here, so I'll give you my, you know. So I get questionnaires as a candidate, extremely detailed, and if you can see their agenda, and you go through it and you go, well, how can I say yes or no to this? It really depends, right? And there's a lot of that, but there is a huge agenda, and if you're off on any single one of them, you're against whatever. You're against housing. Yeah, and so, and that carries through when you go to the door. If you say, how do you stand on bike lanes? Well, it's not like bike lanes are fine. It's parking. You want to get rid of bike lanes. And it's all of a sudden, it just takes you right to the end. where there's no conversation. And a lot of times, sometimes it's hostile, a lot of times it's very polite, but if you're not all the way in, you're not part of that group. And so it is a very polarizing thing, which really stifles a lot of conversation, because I think most people are not all the way over here, not all the way over here. They're somewhere in the middle. And they, whether it's bike lanes or housing or whatever it might be, and that's where they feel they are. And for candidates or counselors to have to stand up and say, I'm a CCC, or I'm ABC, or whatever.
Or both.
Or both.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, how do you do that?
So are the groups reflecting polarization, or are they contributing to polarization?
Well,
Yes.
let me dive in on this one here, because I'm just sort of avoiding all of them personally. One of the big criticisms that has often been levied toward neighborhood associations in the past was that they were not representative of the neighborhood. It might actually be, some of them may have started out that way, but then in the end it's just 5 people get together or 3 people get together. In my experience in recent years, these political action committees are often a couple people, really, and even if they formally have more than a small handful of people, it's really just a few people who are calling all the shots. So you're asking voters to sort of look at a slate of candidates and sort of say, oh, this is somehow representative because the Cambridge Civic Association says so. I'm just taking one historical rather than singling out any of the current ones here. Now, if you actually had a belief that that association was a broad-based association with many members and a lot of thoughtfulness and process and give and take and whatever, then you could have a lot of faith in that. But in my experience and my observations today, and I'm not just talking about the PACs. I mean, some of these things aren't necessarily called political action committees. They're just a few major ones. But it's 3 people who get together. And we have decided this is what progressivism is.
Cool name.
Yeah, we've got a cool name,
A logo.
Right, a logo, exactly like, or somebody who gets up, I'm not gonna name names now, but somebody who gets up every single council meeting and says, I'm speaking for the blah, 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 blah. I go, no, you're not. You're speaking for you and your friend down the street, And I think that the voters are getting a little bit cheated in the sense that there is this strong suggestion that somehow there is this big assembly of people who got together and decided that these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. But I just don't think it's that way at all. I think it's just a handful of people ultimately.
And I think there's a distinction between, there's and there's a legal distinction between the PAC and then the organization, right? So, I may seek endorsements from certain organizations because I agree with their platform, and I may not seek endorsements from other organizations because I don't agree with their platform. And Robert, what you were saying earlier, some of that is helpful, right? It is somewhat helpful to, if you have 20 people running all at large, there is some benefit to saying, well, here's our platform and these are the counselors we think will support that. If you don't agree with that platform, then those aren't, maybe you don't vote for those people. The PACs are, that's a different, there's no coordination between individual to legal, between individual counselors and the political action committee. So they do what they do, right? So if CCC or ABC wants to put out, their PAC wants to put out a card that has, I know this because I've been on a few cards that I've been like, Jesus, why are they putting me 8th on this? Where clearly I had no influence in what they said because it's like, this isn't even alphabetical. So they do what they're going to do, right? Now, if you want to talk about money and politics, I had this conversation with one of these organizations that was concerned about money and politics. But they weren't really concerned about money in politics. They were concerned about money from certain people in politics. And I said, well, if you're really concerned about getting money out of politics, don't endorse anybody who takes more than a $50 contribution or a $100, whatever your, set your limit where you want, or spends more than $10,000 on their campaign. But if someone gets a $1,000 check from someone who has this profession and a $1,000 check from someone who has that profession, buys the same number of stamps, right? And so if you think that money in politics leads to influence, and you want to get it out of pocket, that's a fair conversation. I mean, I hate raising money. That's a fair conversation. I think we would all love to not have to raise money. Or, you know, I don't do a lot of fundraisers on Brattle Street. You know, not that I have any problem with Brattle Street, but that's, you know, I had someone come to my fundraiser, the last one I did, and God bless him, he brought me 4 coupons from Macy's and said, you need to buy yourself some new shirts. And that was his contribution, right?
And he was right.
I don't know. I was like, all right, thanks for the tip. But you know, so there's, I mean, this is all, again, it goes back to what I was saying before. These things are all very complicated, and I think if you go into it, you know, I have served with people that maybe I didn't agree with on certain issues. I have served with people that maybe they're not inviting me over for Thanksgiving, and maybe I'm not necessarily inviting them over for Thanksgiving, but I have not served with anybody who I felt was corrupt or didn't have what they thought was the best interest of the city in mind, and maybe a different view of what I have. So this idea, like this whole thing of like,
Can't take developers.
you know, or whatever, like, you know, teachers contribute to my campaign.
Right.
We vote on the school budget. Should I not
Right.
be allowed to have a contribution from a teacher? Because ultimately I vote for the money that's gonna pay their salary, right? I mean, there's all of these different layers, and it goes back to this purity test thing. You know, the people who donate to my money, they're the good people, but you know, and it's like,
Well, but you have to
You know.
wonder if there's a little bit of a conflict of interest to take money from developers.
right?
What-
You take money from people who like magazine. So again, it comes down to, this is my okay.
But they're not
So you were the-
contributing to my campaign.
You were the one person, you didn't vote, it was an 8-1 vote on multifamily housing, right? I assume you didn't vote for multifamily housing because you, honest to God, didn't believe it, right? Not because you were trying to play some political thing, you didn't believe it. I give you the benefit of the doubt and the respect.
I didn't think it was the right
Fine,
solution.
exactly. I give you the respect and the benefit to say that your vote against it was a pure vote against it because you didn't think it was the right thing to do. And the people who contribute to your campaign, whoever they are, whatever job they have, I give you the respect to say that you're not doing them favors, you're not being bribed, right? But then you're quick to turn around and say, well, you get money from these people, it must be something sordid about it. No,
That's not fair.
no.
That's not
Why
fair.
is your money okay? Those people have influence as well.
And
So,
you know, it's funny because I think I had the same conversation with the same organization, Mark. And you know, how do I? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of these groups that have levels of influence, right? And if campaigns didn't need the dollars that they need in order to touch the amount of people that we need to touch, then I think we would be all doing a different level of constituent servicing in terms of knocking doors, fundraising, you know, events, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that it takes money in order to run campaigns. Now, I don't come from, or
But to win
Or
campaigns.
not.
right.
I'm with you there.
But I mean, when you are doing this work, I'm telling people, I don't have even 5 people that max out on my campaign. I don't even have 5 people that max out on me, okay? So I'm definitely getting the nickels and dimes and whoever I can get some dollars from in order to actually do the lit, in order to make sure I have solid people on the ground who could work for me, or the volunteers. I need to give them a slice of pizza or something I can give them to say thank you for giving your time, right? Palm Pilots and stuff, they do not cost nothing. Palm Pilots, Palm
Pilot
cards.
was 1993.
Y'all know what I'm talking about. But the cards, the lit,
I got the Beaumont brain here.
but they don't cost, they're not free.
Right.
These things cost
And you
a
also
lot
don't
of
have
money.
$10,000 to give to your
And
own
I also
campaign.
can't loan myself
That's
$10,000.
That's right.
Okay, so at the end of the day, because specifically we had this conversation in regards to specifically developers, and the pushback was that, well, developers are more on profit over people, okay, versus people over profit. And I don't know if I agree with that one way or the other, right? What I'm saying is that just because someone donates to me doesn't mean that you bought me. right? It means that we are able to have an alignment on some issues. We're able to see the level of support that I need in order to be successful and be a voice on the campaign, on the council, and that it takes dollars in order to do that. Now, my other piece to this issue is that these groups, these organizational groups, the way they have grown, and now they have such an influence and tact on, if you are endorsed by me, you have these rules and restrictions, right? And I think what's heartbreaking too, whether you're endorsed by all or endorsed by some or none or whatever the case is, that's your choosing too, if you choose not to fill out any of those applications. This election year, we have received like 15 some odd questionnaires and applications for endorsements. And I do others that are
questions are very complicated.
And I do, and not just yes or no, right? Oh no, or maybe they are just yes, no, or they're all open-ended.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? And the reality is that, one, we don't have the abundance of time to fill out every single one of those applications.
Yeah, I agree.
And the two is that if you really like me for what I'm able to do and deliver on the floors, then let's have that kind of conversation and believe in me in terms of that level of work. I don't need to fill out your 58 question questionnaire. Right?
And
Exactly
be
how I
happy
feel.
with 57 of the answers, but the 58th one.
But
That's it, right?
But it does force you to do your homework, though. It does force you to develop positions and different things. Like I just did, the Sierra Club and the Environmental League of Massachusetts, like millions of questions. Like you really had to do a lot of research to be able to answer those questionnaires. But I had
I've done those too.
I had a
They don't even
historical
send them to
question,
me.
which is where you don't have ranked choice voting, do you have as many PACs? Because I feel as if the two things are related. Because the advantage of running as a slate, of like if you are endorsed by whatever group, ABC, CCC, Cycle Safety Committee, then if, they don't rank who should get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No.
But even if you're 3 or wherever you are, you might get votes from 4 and 5 because of ranked choice voting. I mean, ultimately, you may be elected by other people on the slate. So I'm wondering what the relationship of PACs and slates is to ranked choice voting. I don't know if you know that or you know that.
I can say that, and
Yeah.
I can also give you a little historical perspective, which is back in the days when the mother of all slate makers was the Cambridge Civic Association.
Mm-hmm.
If they endorsed 7, then they printed up 7 different styles, and they rotated. And you were one of the 7. You were on 1/7 of those cards was going to have you at the top, and of course they gave you a lot of those ones for you to hand out, right? So the thing is, they at least had to maintain the appearance of being unbiased toward an individual candidate, even if there was, as we used to call it, the whispering campaign. Yeah, but you don't really want to vote for this one, right? That happened because it inevitably happens. But one thing I just wanted to say here is that the reason why I started doing the Cambridge candidate pages, for what it's worth, which was over 20 years ago now, was because it offended me that there were certain campaigns who were extremely wealthy and other campaigns that had nothing. And so I said, I have an idea here. I'm going to have an identical template. That was important, so that everybody looked exactly the same. When they, at least at first blush, candidates could write in whatever they wanted to. I never edited out whatever they gave me there. But the idea was to level the playing field and at least have some mechanism where all candidates are put on an exactly level playing field throughout. One of the things I used to do, not on the candidate pages, but on the Civic Journal, was I would keep track of things like real estate stuff. A few years ago, I stopped doing that because, I'm sorry, some people may not like my saying that, but I don't think that the real estate contributions is relevant anymore. It's a small fraction of things. It's relatively unimportant now. There are other things that I look at and I give it to Harry Oswald going, I don't know about that. But it's not so much the developer money so much anymore. There are a lot of other criteria, I think. I'll also say that when putting, and I'm not just here to broadcast about candidate pages, just to say that I never put information on there about campaign finance. Not on the candidate pages. Because I know that for some people, they're thinking like, oh, well, I mean, that's the criteria that, I said, no, I'm not gonna give you that much. You can go find that out yourself, the Office of Campaign Political Finance.
So like,
You can look
who
up
has
anybody.
donated? You just show
I don't
the
give it.
number of
Don't
what's
do
in the
it.
account.
Don't do it.
And I think, again, I'm gonna be a broken record, but again, I think things are more complicated. You also should look at what people do with that money, right? Now, I raise a decent amount of money. Does anybody ever talk about, I spend thousands of dollars on donating to nonprofits in the city through my campaign account. I sponsor Little League teams, I sponsor girls softball, I go to the Margaret Fuller auction, I give them $500 to help fund a kid go to camp. Like, a lot of the, I don't just buy, anyone who works for my campaign, they get $20 an hour, right? I spend a lot of money on salaries for people, because if you're gonna work for me, not the one-off canvas shit, but if you're gonna be, you should get paid, and I don't care if you're a high school kid or whatever, I'm gonna pay you for your work. People should get paid for their work. So, but people, they look at the number and they say, oh, he's just raised this amount of money, but I mean, a good portion of my money goes right back to supporting vulnerable people in the community. So if I can take a $1,000 donation from somebody, regardless of what their occupation is, and I use that money to get elected so that I can be a voice for Cambridge Rise and for affordable housing, and when I was mayor, free lunch for all kids in the Cambridge Public Schools before the state did it. And I'm using my position as an elected official to help vulnerable people in our community. That's a good use of that money. Now, if I was using that money to just benefit the wealthy people in the community, I'm not, and maybe that's a different conversation, but you gotta look at what people do with it too. It's not, all these things, you can't just ask the surface question. They're deeper, they're more complicated. I would rather someone who can afford to give me $500 give me $500 so that I can so I can get reelected, so that I can support people who can't afford $10 because they need that $10 to buy their dinner that night, right? I don't want someone who doesn't have enough money for food to give me any money. I want Macy's coupons so I can buy some better shirts, right? Because they can't afford it. So, again, I think people often look for simple answers, to think that is what sums up any of us, and it's not that simple. The other question is, we are in a very stressful time in our world, and how much of that divisiveness then trickles down to local politics, right? And I think I think in our whole culture now, there is this, I'm right, you're wrong, you're evil, I'm good, I do it right, the people who support me are pure, the people who support you are horrible human beings. And I think that goes all the way up the chain, right? And I think we're seeing it at the local level too. And I just want to remind people, we are all local people. We see each other in the supermarket, at the grocery store. None of us are doing this because we don't care about the community. We may have different ideas about the community and how to solve our problems, but you don't run for local office, most of us, because you don't care. And let's give each other a little grace, a little understanding, even if we strongly disagree with each other, and actually not assume evil intentions in the people who we're serving with or are trying to serve with.
Is how do we address the rising political tension and polarization, not just nationally, but here at home? And what kind of temperament do we need from our leaders in order to have those difficult conversations?
Well, there's
Sure, you want to go first?
okay. But yeah, I think it isn't right or left nationally. I think it's off the charts. It's not even on a poll at all. But so, yeah, I think that we're going to have to deal with this guy in Washington, and he's going to pop up in different ways, and he's weaponizing the federal government to prod us to go in directions we may not go. So I think that from a local standpoint, we need to resist that type of those type of values within ourselves as we communicate with each other and we negotiate with each other. The question is how do we resist somebody with such power? and has the purse strings and enforcement. And that's we're gonna have to band together, I think, and really figure that one out, because it's a real tough problem.
And I'll just interject, I think that was a fantastic answer, but I think we can all agree that there's problems at the federal level. What I'm really curious about in this question is how do we address the division within our city?
Well, I'll just say, people say fight fire with fire. Truth is, you fight fire with water. And I sometimes, it disturbs me when I hear people giving very, very, strong opinions about this and that, and then, let's just fight back and give equally strong opinions. You realize all that's going to do is just have a big fire going on all day long, Sometimes you have to diffuse these things, whatever. And even in the national politics level, sometimes it pays to actually try and understand where the other person's coming from. I mean, I have 2 living brothers, both of whom voted for Donald Trump. I would never vote for Donald Trump, but these are my brothers too. So I want them to explain to me. Just tell me what you find attractive, whatever, and I'll try and explain to them here. But I'm not going to sort of say, "You're not my brother anymore." I'm not going to do that, And I just think,
What does Thanksgiving look like?
we don't really get together. No, it's not because you think we just live in faraway places, But I just think that sometimes just arguing it through and pushing back whatever is not the right way. There's got to be some sort of a third way to approach this here, which is really more how do you diffuse the differences. I think most Americans are not all that different when you really get down to it, even those who voted this way versus the other way ultimately. And I have enough faith in my country and the people in this country that sooner or later we're going to find a way out of this.
Now is the time that we need to come together as community. We have to really think about what does it mean to be a community member, to be, to respect and just support your neighbor, right? And I think this is something that I've said on the council a couple of times in comments around the divisiveness. Some of that we kind of need to put aside because we need to band together in these other issues. When ICE is showing up at schools or showing up in our community or whatever that looks like, folks need to be coming together to support individuals and families and not oh, well, you supported and voted on that issue, you're not my friend. Well, on this issue, we need to be coming together. And I think this is where I also just channel Dr. King on a beloved community. It's not really, in this moment, we're not feeling that coming from the top. So on the local level where we do have some control, we need to band together and be let's be community. So when folks are seeing, say, ICE out in our community, they're dialing in, they're letting people know. Even if we're talking about just food insecurity or other things, right, that's also impacting many of our neighbors, we're trying to band together, find food, find shelter, find clothing, whatever it is for our community member. What is happening in Washington and the way it is trickling down, we also need to have faith in our leaders who we elected to be in those seats too, to continue to represent us to the best of their abilities, because they are challenged in a way that is hard, really hard. When I think of Congresswoman Clark or Presley or, Warren and Markey, when I think of those folks who are literally sitting in Washington and have to be at the table making some of those hard decisions and having colleagues who really are on the opposite end of the spectrum from where they are, that is not where we are as a local body. So again, while we might disagree on some things, we can really band together on so much more. And I think on these particular issues, we need community more than anything else right now.
Yeah, I'll sort of try to maybe bring my answer back to some of the PAC stuff and the slates and all that kind of stuff. It's going to take a community. It's going to take all of us to bring even the temperature down locally, right? We are elected. We want to continue doing our jobs because we feel that they're important and that we have something to offer the community. And so we are susceptible to constituencies and how things swing. And I actually think, you know, when you go back and you think about some of the more divisive or, you know, some of the more difficult conversations that have happened, I'm not sure it's always the council that's being the divisive ones. Right? I mean, I think a way, you know, sort of community organizing 101 will, you know, the way you get people to get involved in your organization is often to scare them, to get them fired up about something. And I'm not saying I'm not picking which one of these. There's some of the organizations that support me sometimes put out information that isn't exactly correct, or is meant to get people fired up. Some of the organizations that don't support me do the exact same thing. And they have a lot of influence. So I want to just say to everybody, you know, not just the council, you know, needing to listen and more but we need, like, these organizations, you know, when you put out a flyer that says, you know, if you don't support X, then you don't care about, you know, Y, and create that sort of, you know, you're with us or against us kind of thing, that doesn't help, right? Or you put out a flyer that says, if this passes, there's going to be a 20-story building on this little tiny side street, when that is not what the ordinance is calling for. That doesn't help. It goes back to most of the people. I always think of, like, I used to say my grandmother, but she passed away, but, you know, does my stepmother hear this, right? She's kind of involved, not totally involved, is on a bunch of listservs, gets information, but she'll call me and be like, oh my God, I got this thing, you know, this email saying that, you know, if you guys pass this, then, you know, you're gonna start, like, there's gonna be 40-story buildings all over again. I'm like, no, that's not what it is, it's not what we're doing. You know, here's what the language is. And so we have to make sure that we're not throwing fuel on the fire, but we need the people who are out there, the community leaders that are out there, to also not throw fuel on the fire. And if we do that, and we all say, look, we're gonna try and have, you know, honest, tough, complex conversations that may get heated at times because people are opinionated, right? We're the most opinionated zip code, right? Pick a zip code. We have 5 of them in Cambridge or whatever. We're all the most opinionated zip code. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we don't have to make it worse. And I think this is where we really need the help of some of these other folks that are out there to help bring the temperature down and not increase it. And so we all have to be in community together and doing that. That's really something we want to accomplish.
I wanted to bring it back to City Councilor Joan Pickett again. I feel like one of her legacies on her during her service on the council was bringing civility to the council, and I feel as though I feel like that's really lived on. I think all of us. She was very respectful, and I think all of us are trying to behave really, really well and be cooperative colleagues. And I think she was our model. I think she set the bar for the council, and I feel lucky that, again, I'm on the council and that she set that bar. One of the things that I've been trying to do is bring in experts in committee meetings to broaden conversations. So I've done that with the Neighborhood and Long-Term Planning Committee, and I've done that with the Transportation Committee. And I feel as if, again, as a museum curator, like, my goal was always to understand an idea and then to communicate it well. So I feel like often the tension lies in our not. And also, I led brainstorming sessions forever with experts to finally get to a crystal clear idea. Like when in organizing exhibition ideas and themes, we would have, with experts like scholars from all over the country, we might have 4 meetings. And it wouldn't be until that 4th meeting that the idea crystallized, and we actually had a good idea that was worthy of advancing. So I feel like bringing in experts and broadening the conversation is one way to just end up with better solutions and policies to advance. community-wise, I agree. I feel like the city does a great job with dance parties, with Meet Your Neighbor Day, with so many events, public events that bring people together. I feel like food, the arts, these are things we must invest in gathering opportunities so that neighbors interact with one another.
And beer.
Beer could be great too.
Night market tonight, it's a beer garden.
I'll be at the beer.
But I feel like all of those things bring the community together. So those are things that I think we have to continue to really invest in. They're critical to our DNA and being a vital community. And I have confidence, and I think we have to help one another. I was just talking to the city manager about a public campaign on, courtesy and helping your neighbor. I think we all really have to make more of an effort to help our neighbors. I don't think we can rely just on social services, existing organizations in the city to serve all our elders and young people. Lots of people are feeling isolated. We need to reach out to, everyone needs to reach out to somebody. And if we all did that little bit, the world would be a better place. So I think just building, we need to be connecting. I'm going to my neighborhood street party tonight. I just feel like those little events make all the difference in the world for the culture of the city, and I think we need to continue to foster them. I think the city's actually pretty great at that, but I think we really need to be doing more of that going forward.
On that note, I'd like to close out.
Motion to
because we
adjourn.
have just a couple more minutes left. If we could go around and have people shout out a business or an organization that they feel is producing something brilliant or needs some attention.
Oh.
If there's a business that's struggling and people don't know that service is out there, let's call it out. If there's a delicious food, Cathie, do you have something?
I was just going to say, I love Somerville Cambridge Elder Services. That group does extraordinary service for our elders. They provide visits to the doctors. They have someone just come and talk to them. They do health checks. They provide insure. They are an extraordinary resource for this community, and we should be engaging them more and more in our CHA properties, and just they're doing miracle work.
See, there's always one that sets a very high-minded tone when someone else is going to say, "Oh, the chocolate chip cookies are delicious." But yeah, that's very nice, Mark.
Now I gotta think of something like no. The hard part is, we have so many nonprofits in our community that are doing incredible things.
Of course.
It's just, I can't pick, one.
Which is why it can be anything.
Right. I'll put in a plug for Bagalosaurus. My
Nice.
sister-in-law. So go there. They're great. I don't know. I think that I guess if I had to I guess I don't have to, but one organization that I think has a lot of sort of tentacles. I don't know if that's a
big
reach.
A big reach.
Because tentacles are kind of gross. And so, maybe that's the wrong term. Is CEOC. Because everything from helping people with their taxes to food security to housing to, that they're an organization that just, again, touches people in a lot of different ways. So I love them. But yeah, I think we have a great nonprofit network, which needs a lot more support, especially now with funding cuts and things that they're facing. So I'll just shout out, you can pick, there's 100 different nonprofits you could choose to support, everything from writing a check to showing up and helping them, at an event or whatnot, but just do something.
Niko, are you sticking with your original from the last session, or are you gonna?
I'll go last again, so please.
Okay, well, I'm gonna repeat mine. It's just because I'm a lack of imagination.
Did we not get to give our favorites?
Oh,
We're
yes, of
going
course
around in a
we're-
circle. Don't worry.
We'll get to you.
It's two arcs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I almost accidentally had Simon's hot chocolate a couple weeks back, and it was amazing.
There you go.
Awesome. Bread Gourmet, black-owned business on Main Street, really struggling right now, given they're 1 year in, and they even sent us an email regarding the implementation, unfortunately, of bike lanes, but it has now made it so that there are no meters on that street of Main Street. So folks who may not be Cambridge residents who are coming in to visit it's really a struggle to find parking, and they are finding it really hard to think about what staying in Cambridge looks like, being 1 year in Cambridge as a black-owned business.
I love burgers. I will have bread tonight.
Fantastic.
They're very good.
On to me. Well, I'm going to put a plug in for the Central Square Business Improvement District. And first note that how, even when we're all crazy under COVID, that those were the folks who gave us a lot of hope. And they created Starlight Square. And Starlight Square, as we knew it, is gone. But the thing is, they're quietly behind the scenes right now recreating Starlight Square within the old Revolution Clinics building. And there will be a ribbon cutting, I think, in mid-October for an indoor venue that will essentially be Starlight Square indoors 3.0. Even the Daily Table, which closed, is going to be recreated in the space which was Hilton Tent City. And there's a lot of, I mean, when they created the Business Improvement District some years ago, a lot of things they said, oh, we're going to take care of the cleaning up and doing this and that. But all these, I mean, I remember speaking to it then, there was all these intangible things, marrying potential, spaces to things that people needed, whatever, that are all happening quietly behind the scenes right now. So if anybody's been feeling pessimistic about the vacant storefronts in Central Square, and I was feeling very pessimistic.
There's like 12.
There is more than that. You can start to maybe entertain a little optimism, because I think we're moving in the right direction, and a lot of credit goes to Michael Monesteem and Brian and Eric and all the other people associated with the bid who are really, really trying to take care of the square.
And once the plaza's done, they're going to be doing some programming.
That's right.
there.
And by the way, right after we finish up here, I'm going over to the night market.
Night market,
and have a
yeah.
few beers with Michael.
I'm excited about Jersey Mike's is actually.
And they're opening up finally.
Right, yeah.
Lastly,
Yeah, I think I'm a small business fan, so I think that, I'm not going to pick one. I think people should really get out and go out and use your small businesses, to participate with them, get to know your business owners all over the city. I enjoy each of the places in my neighborhood. I go in, I know everyone by name, they know me, and you should really go out, because they are precious. There are diversity. They're part of our culture, and we really need to nurture them. Even though we have empty storefronts, let's get them going, and maybe more will come. So.
Can I say one more? Hattie's Lunch. Sorry, I know you don't want me to.
Absolutely.
Hattie's Lunch. Go get a beer next week, even now, today, every day. But next week when it is the 5K,
That's
next
right.
Sunday.
That's
I
right.
think we can all agree on that one.